Wow, good evening everyone and welcome to November's webinar. This is a collaboration. It's the best collaboration since Ant and Deck. It's Monitor Farm Mondays and skills coming together to tackle the subject of people. And I'm going to try my best not to come up with some corny people quotes, but they are everything. And so hopefully this evening we're going to talk about the importance of people and getting it right. So thanks for taking the time out. As I mentioned, we're joined by the Monitor Farm Monday crew. We've got Philip Dolbear, joined by Monitor Farmer Richard Payne, and we have Rachel from Kite, who's going to give us that expert advice. So without further ado, let's get through some housekeeping. So as always, all the attendees are on mute. If you want to ask a question at any point, there is a question box on the right-hand side of your screen. I'll try and answer them as we go through. I'll put them forward to the panel. But if you at any point can't get your questions through during, we have a bit of time at the end to get through those. We aim to finish about 8 o'clock. But don't worry, it will all be recorded, so we can email that to you if you miss the end or if you want to share it with anybody else afterwards. Excuse me. So there will be some templates and tools available as well afterwards, so you'll be able to use the learning and take it back to your business. And don't forget the most important thing, we will send a survey at the end. So please be open and honest with your feedback. And if there's some other areas that you want us to focus on, then please do so. Okay, fantastic. So that's the housekeeping. Over to introduction. So as mentioned, I work in the skills team. My name's Amy Burke. That's pretty much enough about me. My details will be at the end. If you have any questions, anything to do with skills or people, please do get in touch. We'll hand over to Philip first. Philip, could you introduce yourself, please?
Good evening, everybody. Yes, my name is Philip Dalbert. I work with the AHDB cereals and oilseeds team. I'm based down in the southwest. As Amy's already mentioned, we're collaborating with the skills team tonight, and this webinar is forming part of our Monitor Farm Mondays program, which is our switch from our normal winter meeting program of Monitor Farm meetings onto a digital platform for obvious reasons with COVID. And this is a very clearly an apt subject, not just for cereal farmers, but for everybody, and hence the joining up with the skills team. So that's me, and now I'll pass on to Richard, and he'll just introduce himself a little bit.
Hello, good evening, everyone. Richard Payne. I am the sort of Taunton monitor farmer. We farm about 6 miles west of Taunton, on the western edge of the Taunton Vale. This is my third year, I think, on the scheme, and I'm really pleased to be here to try and impart some of my limited knowledge on employment and looking after staff. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Richard. I love your modesty, and everyone's going to find out a lot more about you, which is the reason why you're here this evening. So what I'll do is I'll hand over to Rachel now, and we'll just get straight stuck into it. Rachel, so take it away.
Great stuff. Good evening, everyone. So my name is Rachael Madeley Davies, and I work for Kite Consulting as a consultant. Actually, I'll go into a bit now, actually, about why I'm talking to you, if we can, please, Amy. And this will probably cover a bit more about my background. I also think it's quite important to understand why someone thinks they can talk to you and why they think they're suitably qualified to talk about subjects. So this is me, over 10 years ago now, 12 years ago, complete with my horsehair wig. So I was called to the bar back in 2008, and I specialised in employment law and also something called alternative dispute resolution, which sort of includes mediation and things like that. So I've worked as a sort of HR function for a major retailer nationally, and also I've been used to managing sort of both small and large teams within sort of diversified farming businesses over the last 10 years. My current role, so I deliver sort of one-to-one business consultancy and also specialise in people management consultancy via Kite. So I like to think that probably I've got some practical, but also some theoretical, and also some of the legal sort of requirements of people management. Thanks, Amy. So objectives for this evening. I think first of all, it's good to understand. Oh, hang on one second. Sorry, I couldn't see that then. It's understanding what exactly a people strategy is, and being able to recognise what it can do for your business. We will sort of encourage you to consider your current staffing situation, and also introduce you to the notion of a brand for your farming business, and actually so you start seeing your farming business as a brand. We'll also help you sort of identify the potential opportunities in the labour market going forward, and also how you can access them for the business. So hopefully in the series of tonight you will sort of be able to pluck out some of these objectives. Thank you. So is a people strategy for me? The simple question and the simple answer would be that yes, it is. If you employ people, or if you use family labour, then actually yes, a people strategy is for you, and it needs to be part of your business. So it is applicable for all farming businesses. You don't have to be M&S to have a people strategy. All businesses who rely on any form of labour, whether it's family labour or employed labour, should have a people strategy. And actually, I'm a strong believer that a good people strategy goes hand in hand with effective business planning and management. So that would be the simple answer, is yes, it is for you.
Rachel, can I butt in there and perhaps just ask that question to Richard, because that sounds quite, I know you mentioned M&S, and clearly we're a long way away from M&S on a farm situation, but you know, in your situation, Richard, I know this is yourselves and one employed labourer, does it still feel too formal? Because it's almost just like a family on its own, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it is. I mean, I think Rachel's got a point. I think perhaps take it back to, you know, do you want to have a brand, and therefore, or I mean, I consider myself just a small business that is trying to do the best that it can and farm to the best of its ability. So, I mean, I can come on to this later, but you know, having a people strategy is just, in sort of my view, is just being a good human being, a good employer, and actually really valuing the people that you employ, because without them, your business is nothing. They are the most important asset we have. You know, we can all have smart tractors, combines, grain stores, what have you, but without people, they mean nothing. So we do have to, you know, invest in them and value them and look after them with a view to getting the most out of employed labour for the success of your business. Back to you, Rachel.
Well, I'm glad you agreed with me anyway. It's always it's a good start to any sort of presentation. Can you just move on to the next slide, please, Amy? So what is a people strategy? I understand that actually it does sound a bit fancy, and it does sound a bit M&S, but actually it needn't be fancy. And I'd be quite keen to sort of really stress that whether you're running M&S or a corner shop, then actually you do need a people strategy. What it actually is really depends on your business, but these are the core things that I believe that should be central to any business's people strategy. So first of all, recruitment and retention. It's about how you recruit, where you recruit, what are your recruitment goals, what's the process, or you know, is there a process, or is it a simple chat at the back of the shed and a handshake? It's about really focusing on actually how you recruit and how you attract the right people into your business. And then we have this word retention, and I actually think retention often gets overlooked or rather undervalued. Turnover of staff is incredibly costly financially, but actually also costly in terms of stress. It's very stressful when you turn over staff, because it often means that you're left short at some time, and obviously it impacts your business. So then moving on to staff requirements of your business, and this is a real sort of Billy basic, and this is looking at the roles that you need to fill, and also the tasks, and also the time frame. Are there roles that are long term? Are they short term? And actually, how will those roles and that staff demand change over time and in the future? Have you got any expansion plans? So if you're expanding, say, your dairy herd, for example, over the next 2 years, then you need to start fitting in now what your staffing requirements will be in accordance with that. Secondly, thirdly rather, going on to talent management. It does sound a bit like your pop stars or something, but it's not. It links back to staff retention again, and it's about keeping good people in your business. Is there a career path for those who want one? Do you talk to staff about where they want to be in 5 years' time? It's okay if they want to be in their current role in 5 years' time, but others may have their own goals. And actually, it's about understanding that and how you can manage that within your business so those people don't move on if you want them to stay. It's about investing in your team, training and developing them. This can include you as a business manager and owner as well as your people. So it's really important to really manage and develop and nurture that talent within your business. Next, I move on to reward. Now, I know this can be a bit of an ugly subject somewhere. That for many businesses, staffing and people can be either the biggest or the second biggest cost. Obviously, it depends on sector. But it's about looking at the value in having certain individuals in your business and not necessarily the cost. Obviously, it's got to balance, but I think it's about time that we started seeing what people bring to our businesses and the value they add rather than the cost that they add into that business. Having the right people will add value to your business. They will pay for themselves. Finally, and I think I can't stress this enough, actually, and this is a whole sector as agriculture, we need to start being inclusive, and this should underpin any people strategy. It's about being inclusive in relation to who we employ. Don't have set ideas. Ensure that your business is attractive and open-minded to include those who would not traditionally find themselves in agriculture, because they can really add something into our businesses. Thanks, Amy. Could you just move on to the next slide, please?
Yeah, I certainly will. Just one moment, because I thought it'd be a good point to raise that everything you're just talking about right now, you've very kindly pulled together a template for us that we'll be able to share after the webinar. So don't worry, everybody, about scribbling down all these points. There is some guidance behind this. We have got a quick question coming through, if you don't mind me asking that now. So we've got a question about what would be an acceptable staff turnover percentage within a business to enable the business to stay fresh, but maintaining a solid knowledge and skills base. I guess that comes on to saying, it's good to have some turnover, but what would be a healthy turnover?
It really depends on the business. So it depends on the nature of the business. It also depends on the number of employees. I'd like to say probably anything between 12 and 15%, but it would depend on how many employees you had and the nature of that business. I think, as a sort of a rule of thumb, most businesses would know if they had a retention problem, but because they'd noticed that people weren't staying with them for probably more than 12 months or so. And obviously that would always be a bit of a red flag. So probably, I'm sorry, it doesn't really directly answer it, but I think it's very subjective according to the sector and also the business size.
Rachel, could I come in there? I mean, I had a previous existence as an army officer many years ago, and in the public sector, most people are only in the same or current job for about a 2 to 2.5 year period or time scale. And whilst when we felt in the army that if you had a really good person, you were going to lose them after 2 years. Equally, you could say that if you had a really bad person, you could get rid of them in 2 years. But what I'm saying is that in a public sector environment, that actually a turnover is healthy for a business, because you're always bringing in fresh ideas. They might not always be good ideas, but they're fresh ones. In a farming situation, that may be slightly different, because of course there is a certain amount of on-the-job training, which sadly the government isn't paying for. We are as business owners. So don't be frightened of turnover. It is up to us as managers to try and retain the really good ones through, just creating a great business environment. If that helps, Rachel.
Yeah, actually, probably just to add on to that, person who asked that question is, maybe sometimes it's about doing exit interviews. Again, I know that sounds a bit corporate, but actually just an informal chat with why someone is leaving might be helpful, and a helpful gauge of perhaps if there are any issues within the business and the management. So that's what I suggest, is ask people why they're leaving. And perhaps sometimes it's being more open-minded in the fact that maybe you as a business manager might be the issue if you have got a high turnover, that maybe it could be a personality or a management style that is making people move on.
Great, thank you both. There was some really great answers there. I'm sure it's probably a webinar in itself, isn't it? So we'll carry on.
Right, can we have the next slide, please? Right, so first of all, and as Amy said, we have got a bit of a template sort of tool that hopefully will help draw out some of these sort of key areas, and this is sort of one of them. And actually, it's really important to sort of review where you're at. So, at the moment, do you have enough staff? Are your current staff actually working ridiculous hours because you simply don't have enough, or are you picking up that slack because you don't have enough hours? And then it's thinking about, do you have the right people in your business? So this probably goes back to Richard's point about sort of retention, really, or refreshing, is that actually I'm not saying that you want to keep 100% forever. Then again, if they're the right people, you can, but actually it's really identifying, do you have the right individuals in your business? Do you have any bad eggs? Do you have people that are disruptors? Or actually, do you have people that just aren't performing? So it's really being really open and honest and seeing that, do you have the right people and the best people for your business? Do you then have a developing workforce? Do you invest them in terms of skill, in capability, in attitude? Do you give them training? Are they willing to take training, to go on training? This is a big bugbear for me in terms of agricultural businesses now, and it's about employees getting sufficient rest breaks. We seem to have developed a bit of a sort of a reputation as an industry who sometimes can really they really want their sort of pound of flesh with staff, and it is really important that staff get sufficient rest breaks, and that includes weekly breaks. Yes, staff can have days off in the week, but also holidays. And I think it's really key as good employees that we ensure that people are getting sufficient breaks, because we need them. Moving on, do you communicate with your staff? If so, how do you do it? Do you do it informally, formally, combination of the two? Do you have WhatsApp groups? Do you have a weekly huddle or a management meeting? So actually, how do you communicate with your staff, and how frequently? And actually, is that communication effective? Now, this is probably always a bit of a question, whether people might not want to think about it or not, but actually, are your staff happy? And I think whether you perform appraisals, or again, thinking back with that communication, if you have informal conversations and discussions, can you discuss, or can you sort of try and dissect whether your staff are actually happy in their job? And actually, is your business a good business to be part of? And I appreciate for many farmers that perhaps sometimes you possibly haven't been an employee, or maybe haven't been an employee for a long time, but it's about really discerning, would you want to work for you? And I know that could be a tough question sometimes, and you might not want to know the answer, but it's really critical in how you can determine where you are.
Richard, I wonder whether I could ask you, Richard, from your point of view, in an agricultural context where there's a small team and you've got one, but even if it's 3 or 4 employees, where are the challenges for you in the agricultural business in that list?
Philip, well, I think probably my business is possibly fairly, common with others, is that staff retention is not, staff turnover is not very high, and therefore one's staff almost become a part of one's own family, and that has, pros and cons. I mean, it's sometimes quite difficult to be subjective and critical with staff that have been with you a very long time, because actually, hopefully, if they have been with you a long time, they mean an awful lot to you, and they have only been with you for a very long time because they bring a lot of worth to the business. it is a difficult one. I'm in the lucky position that I've had, one member of staff who's been with me as long as I farmed here in Somerset. And I've always felt with my management style that actually if you can encourage employees to treat the business as their own and involve them in decision making, you get far more out of people than you do if you just treat them as employees. The boss never has all the answers, never, in any business. And therefore it is really important to engage your staff, because they'll bring so much to your business and quite often have the answer that you've been racking your brain for months about, just like that. I was always told you should never work in a business, you should work on it. And we're all guilty as farmers, by and large, by working in it. And I think it makes one's macro decision making less effective. So always empower your staff to not be frightened to make suggestions, because we certainly don't have all the answers. Absolutely not.
Thank you. Very interesting. I think a lot of us can relate to that, whether we're in farming or working for AHDB or whatever it may be, I'm sure. Thanks, Rachel.
Yeah. And I think sort of perhaps reflecting on that a bit, I agree. I think there's nothing more empowering and motivating as an employee to feel that you're part of that process. But I suppose it's making sure that you draw a line in terms that that employee doesn't have the same interest in your business as perhaps you do. So therefore, you may think it's acceptable to work 70 hours a week, but they don't. Then actually, they don't have the same interest in that business. They get a pay packet. So I suppose it's striking a balance between those two things. We can move to the next slide, please.
Rachel, I'd like to say something. I mean, one thing I've noticed over the years is that actually, and I'm sure it's common across all forms of employment, but especially in farming, is that farm workers, farm managers, whatever you like, whatever you have on your farm, they're far more independent than they were 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they have their, many more interests outside of the job. When my father was farming, I mean, we had 14 employees, all of whom lived in tied accommodation. And I've sort of found that actually nowadays, people who come to work to you are more than happy to organise their own accommodation, because it gives them far more freedom. Their accommodation is not dependent on their job. So, frankly, if the job is no longer there, they suddenly lose their house. And I think, they're better educated, they're better trained than they were. And one has to recognise as an employer that they have many more interests outside of the job. Whilst it's very easy for us to be one-track mind, I've got to get the harvest in, I've got to get the drilling done at all costs. Not everyone in your team may sort of share that same urgency, but it's just down to communication. And if I found that if you can empower your staff with a management role, however small or large it may be, they end up thinking about that task much more about themselves. And in fact, you don't actually have to give instructions. You might wake up one morning and suddenly find that the tractor is going up and down the field, and your employee has thought about that job and has taken on the responsibility for doing it.
I think you're taking them on the journey with you, aren't you? And I think that's the key to good sort of leadership, is that you take your team with you. And that's
that's the only way. You have to, you have to be there when it matters in your business. And you have to show that sort of leadership, and you have to be able to do all the really grotty jobs and not just, take the peachy ones. But I've sort of found that if you, we had this thing in the army called the sort of mushroom principle. If you're kept in the dark and fed on SH1T, you won't think outside the box. But actually, if you're involved in management decisions and are, you're given a part of, or the whole of the bigger picture, I just think people feel more empowered. They certainly feel more respected, because actually they feel, hey, the boss respects my opinion and respects my input. And actually, it's all about sort of just creating a community within your business. It's really not difficult. And I think you just have to, I'm trying to think of the right word, but you just have to get off your high horse and say, I may be the boss, but I'm the boss in title only. You're all, what you want to achieve is everyone striving for the same goal.
Definitely, some really good points there. And also, we're getting quite a few questions in. We will get onto them, but I think with the time we've got, we're going to allow Rachel just to carry on if you want to.
That's fine.
Rachel.
I feel like we should be calling Richard Mr. Motivator, really, after that. It's all music to my ears. It's great stuff. So sort of moving on, so once you've sort of reviewed your current sort of situation where you're at, it's actually how about you get your staffing right. And I know Richard actually very usefully near the beginning did mention about businesses as a brand. And again, I feel that staff retention and attracting the right people and the right new staff are both actually really important. So sort of staff retention and attracting those people go hand in hand. And actually, it's really important to have succession in terms of staff. I know we often talk about succession in terms of family and business ownership, but actually staff succession is just as important. So, identifying that perhaps have you got an aging workforce, that perhaps 3 key people are in their late 50s, and actually in the next sort of 5 to 10 years you might have an issue. And actually it's how then you succeed through your team and identify any potential successes with that team and make appropriate plans. And actually discuss with your team as well. Ask people what their retirement goals are. You don't want to feel that you're pushing them out of the business, but just so you both understand, because they may well have anxiety about the retirement plans as much as you might. And there's a really important sort of cycle here between these two sort of sections. And building this business brand, it's about being the business you want to be. And I ran some workshops last year here in Wales, and the amount of farmers, their key goal was they wanted to be the best business for people to work in. That is what they wanted. It wasn't about achieving profitability or yields. Actually, that was their goal. And I think probably we need to focus a bit more about this and how we see our businesses as brands. Can we move on to the next slide? Or Richard, have you got a
quick one? Yeah, I mean, succession is an interesting point for both the business and for staff. As Philip intimated earlier on, I employ 1 full-time member of staff, and I don't think he would mind me saying that he does have health issues, and I think he understands that there will be a time when he feels, and it will be up to him, that he feels he can't do the job. And so this is a problem I'm having to deal with, is how do you ensure that your business doesn't fall off a labour cliff edge. So that is something that I'm having to think about, is how do I either train up someone to take over, or do I have to change my business structure entirely to make up for that labour loss? And it's not simple, because it's not just my business requirements. It'll be with agricultural performance, post-Brexit, post single farm payment. All these things will come into the decision making going forward.
Yeah, no, completely agree. I think it's a really valid point, that it's something that I know it's not easy, but it does need focusing on, and it needs thought and conversation, and it goes back to that effective sort of communication again.
Contingency planning as well with the I've got a great question come through, so that's why I've stopped there. The personal name will remain anonymous, but I'm guessing from this they've got a few gold watches. Are the days of gold watches and long service awards over with natural progression? Is it unfair to keep an employee? So instead of having, historically we would stay in business for quite a while, actually, is it unfair to keep them on and actually progression's better?
Well, actually, you can't sort of automatically assume people are going to retire now at 65. So long gone are the golden days of where people sort of hit that and had a juicy pension, and rest is history. And actually, you can't get rid of people because they reach a certain age. And I appreciate that actually in many sectors that can be a challenge, and possibly if roles are much more physical. So I think it's about open conversation. It's about forward planning before you get to that stage, and about honesty. And actually, are there any other roles in your business that person perhaps who might be older might be more suited to, or might be more suited to them, or would they like to work different hour structures? Or so I think it's about how we incorporate people in our businesses. We certainly shouldn't be forcing anyone to leave because they reach a certain age. It's about appreciating that there are, it's about being inclusive again, and that includes people of all different ages as well.
A lot of people tell me that it is extremely difficult to not only find but retain really good farm staff. And when you think about the complexities of modern machinery, hours one has to work, I think one has to bear. It's a really valid question, that, because it is all about keeping a workforce current and fully trained. Farm machinery is really expensive, and it's very easy to create huge bills, repair bills, if you like, in a business where perhaps cash is not king. It's getting increasingly difficult. I would definitely be guilty of saying that I'm sticking with what I know, with what I perhaps maybe ought to know or ought to try out. Yeah, it's a very valid question, and I have to say I don't really know the perfect answer to it. But everyone's different, every business is different, and I think you've got to go with your gut feel on your workforce. Are they doing a good job for you? Are they, making the business go forward, or is everyone going stale? It's a question that we've all got to ask ourselves.
I suppose just two other points to add would be that there's two, and this is probably slightly the lawyer in me, but I mean, first of all, a non-legal thing, but it's about performance management. So making sure that you do continue to manage performance, especially performance that isn't quite where it needs to be. But also in terms of legality, it's about ensuring that by no means are we saying you can get rid of anyone, because you can't, and actually employees with sort of over 2 years of service do have certain legal protections and employee rights. And I think it's always making sure and being mindful that your employees do have rights, and you need to make sure that they're maintained. Thank you, Amy. Right, so moving on a bit more about this sort of creating a business image and a business brand. Again, there's some really big brands there on the side of the screen, which I'm sure most of you will recognise, or possibly, have a bit of a quiz of yourself or recognise them all. And I appreciate that this feels really fancy and a bit big business, but it's not. And I think it's about thinking about what sort of reputation you want as a business. And that's reputation with your neighbours as well as with your workforce and your sort of locality. And in order to see yourself as a brand, it's think about what your brand values would be, actually, and what you want them to be, because your brand values can be whatever you want them to be. And actually, you need to decide what those brand values should be. So whether you sort of maintain your environment locally, whether you're a good employer, whether you're fair. And you need to integrate those brand values within your business brand. So you need to practice what you preach, and you need to make them sort of integral about how you shape your business and how you carry out all the activity of your business, in terms of how you sell, how you treat your staff, how you work within your local community. And actually, I think social media is a really useful platform for this. And I think I'd encourage, I know there can be a bit of a, perhaps sometimes people are fearful about how social media could leave them open for trolling or for certain pressure groups, shall we say, to access information about their farm. But I think as long as you use it sensibly and you're aware of what you put up, and whatever you put up on social media accounts about your business, that you revert back to your brand values and make sure that you're demonstrating those, it's really good for your business. And actually it can be really quite good for our industry to really get that positive image across there. Thank you. Right. So moving on, and this is about attracting the right people. And by having the right business brand, you will attract the right people to your business. And I think we've reached this sort of impasse in agriculture where we need to be much more challenging with ourselves as an industry, and actually how we treat people and how we get the right people and also the best people into our businesses. And then going back to inclusivity again, it is about being open-minded. If you're advertising for a role, you don't necessarily need experience for every role. And quite often, the right attitude is much more valuable than the experience. You can actually teach people how to do a job, but actually, you've either got the right attitude or you haven't. It's not something you can learn. And I think it's really important ensuring that you invest in people. So it's about attracting the right people and making sure they're aware that you invest and actually that you do provide training, that you provide opportunities for them to develop as individuals, and that will attract them into your business. And also it's about making sure that we are being viewed as professional businesses, because quite often agriculture gets a bit of a rough end of the deal in terms of how it's viewed, and it's not viewed as a profession. But it is, and we all know that actually working on farms is really multi-skilled, and I think it's about ensuring that we demonstrate as business owners that we are professional. And I think in terms of attracting the right people and new people into agriculture, we need to be really mindful now that our labour market is in really sort of uncharted waters and very unusual territory. Sort of post-COVID, we're going to see some of the highest unemployment rates that we've seen for decades, which gives us an opportunity to attract different people that probably have the right attitude into the sectors. But also on the flip of that, and I think this goes back to my point earlier about ensuring that people are getting sufficient breaks, is that post-COVID, work-life balance actually is pretty important to people. And I think a lot of people, it's made them realise that they don't want to be working 60, 70 hours a week, that they do want a greater work-life balance. And I think, as Richard said before, that he's noticing that people are more independent, they have sort of interests that aren't just work, and actually that's really healthy for people. And I think in this sort of backdrop of post-COVID and the opportunities for the labour market, we've also obviously got our points-based immigration system will be starting in January, which will affect how much labour we can have from the continent after January. So I think it's being mindful that there are some risks, but also there are some real opportunities in attracting the right people to the business. Right there, Amy.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions if it's okay to jump in there.
Yeah, go for it.
Let's just get them up. Okay, so this is a really good question actually. Wrong point. So can you have a people strategy for yourself, and what reference points can you use? I quite like that. So very often we look outward and look at everybody else, but actually what about yourself and your own people strategy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it goes back before that actually a people strategy can be for family labour or employed labour, but also when you're developing. So obviously developing and investing in your team also should come under a people strategy, and that includes yourself. And I think it's really important as sort of, whether you're a one-man band or whether you're a leader who has 14 employees, it's really important to invest in yourself and actually really see the value of continued professional development. I've always found it quite odd, obviously being a lawyer, CPD, so continued professional development, it's just like a done thing. You have to do it. If you want to maintain and practice, you have to do it. And yet it's actually quite a new thing in agriculture. So I'm a massive advocate that, the that farmers and farm workers are multi-skilled, multi-talented. We do a number of different things, and it's really important that we develop those skills and actually learn what the current thinking is, and because we're always improving on ways that we can do things. So yeah, absolutely, invest in yourself.
I'd add, to be, one's sort of strategy, and especially in farming, is not to micromanage, because I always found that in my experience that turns staff or employees off. It displays a lack of trust, and actually you've got to be prepared for the odd mistake and the odd collapse. But if you don't micromanage, I find you have to keep an overwatch to make things are going right, because then you need to know when to step in to correct. But actually, do not micromanage. I've always found that is the biggest turnoff for any employee.
No,
and just going on to one of the points you raised, Rachel, about time off. Clive Bailey, who a lot of us know, and AHDB, because he's been to talk to us, had some very interesting points on, timesheet versus salary. I've always been very relaxed, because I trust implicitly my employee that actually, if you ask for days off, they're absolutely fine. I don't ask for them to be put down on a timesheet, because I know that I will get it back in overtime or hard work elsewhere in the calendar year. That's a very good thing that we don't actually do, but I'm sort of increasingly think that a salaried approach is quite a good approach to go down with farming. And can I just go back to also the sort of, the image, the brand image, and being a good employer. We've probably all got businesses that have diversified in some form, and it's not just being a good employer oneself, it is facilitating good business. So if you've got tenants on your farm, in our case, business units, it is creating the right environment for them to work in. And quite often that means, don't be greedy about rents, because, you want them to succeed so they can afford to pay the rent, frankly. So I've always found that if one is an open personality, you want to make life fun for your staff, but also fun for the people that might have businesses within your farm environment, because I think that creates just generally a good environment. I mean, in our case, it could be perceived to be quite lonely for my one member of staff, but because we've created an environment of, let's say, I don't know, 10 other people working on the farm, it gives him a pressure release and someone else to talk to and someone else to bounce ideas off within the farm environment.
No, I think they're really good points, Richard. And, clearly you've created a team, and that's quite often, that's what people want to feel part of. So I think there's some really good points there.
Yeah, definitely. I particularly like this area of attracting the right people, and we could do a whole webinar in itself. We could do a whole series of webinars about this area, especially about the inclusivity, which everybody knows is a big bugbear of mine. But if anybody needs further guidance on this area, then please do get in touch or put it into the survey. We can support that. I've got a brilliant question come through, if you don't mind. So could Richard give an example of empowerment within his business, please?
Ooh. Yes, I mean, it's the most simple way I've done it is actually, for instance, when our agronomist comes round to look at the crops and empty my bank balance, I actually try and not go round with him and the guy that I employ, so they can go round together and talk about it and make a plan. I know the parameters are fairly narrow, because all of us use, pretty much the same chemicals, although they might come from a different company or a different manufacturer. But I have found that actually, if you allow your sprayer operator, in this instance, to sort of make decisions with the agronomist, of which I will obviously have a view over when I see the order form come in, I can ask questions about, is this the right thing to do? I would add at this point that my tractor driver is far more qualified to make decisions about agrochemicals than I am. But you know, that's why he's doing the job and I'm not. So I've always found that you know, that is one of the easiest ways, because he feels, I hope, that he's making the decisions with the agronomist, and perhaps that transfers forward to, you know, living and dying by one's decision. You know, that there will be a certain amount of a post-mortem, let's say, after harvest, about whether they made the right decisions. But I would add that I would keep a very keen eye as an overwatch on the decisions made, and I can always ask the agronomist afterwards, you know, to justify his decision. I mean, we you know, like probably most people, we started a WhatsApp group. In our case, it's called Heathfield Husbandry, and there are 3 members, and we can bounce around ideas. And if any one of us sees a problem, like a pernicious weed or disease or what have you, we ping it all up there, and we all make decisions about it. But I just felt that if you're an employee and you're given a decision fait accompli and you've had no say in the matter, you're less likely to adopt the policy.
Yeah, and I think you reflected on that before about, you know, about taking, you know, so your staff member on this sort of journey with you. And I think what you've touched upon is really important in terms of delegation, and actually it's a bit of an art, and actually, but it works both ways. It's great for the employee because it's motivating, it involves them, it takes them on that journey, but actually it's pretty good for you too, because by delegating certain tasks, it takes that stress and that pressure and another job from you. So I think that's a really good example of how you're doing a really good job, Richard.
I agree. I'm very conscious of time, so we're gonna tick on Rachel, if that's okay.
Yep, that's absolutely fine. Right then, so in summary, I appreciate that it trying to squeeze in a people strategy and some of these big fancy, you know, business brand ideas in sort of just under an hour is quite a tall order. And I think, as we've sort of commented throughout, you could almost have a webinar on some of these topics just in isolation. But hopefully, you know, going back to our objectives this evening, hopefully that, you know, that you do feel that we have sort of covered these things and you have greater clarity in understanding what a people strategy is, and also, you know, thinking about what a people strategy could deliver for your business, and actually, and how it sort of can be built in once you've sort of looked at actually where you're at. And I think, if anything, I'd like to hope that most people tonight will at least consider sort of their current situation in terms of people. And I think, and really review that situation. And I think that would be a really good starting point. And, you know, hopefully eventually it will lead on for you to start seeing your business as a bit of a brand, and therefore building in all these different elements. And, you know, I always like to sort of perhaps end on a bit of a positive, and it's always about seeing the opportunities, not the problems. And as we touched upon, there are opportunities. We work in a really exciting industry, and actually there are opportunities going forward, and how we can attract some pretty brilliant people to the sort of industry. Thank you.
That was the quickest 45 minutes I've known on a webinar. It flew by, didn't it? So what we're going to do now is, we've fortunately got this 15 minutes available to ask questions from the audience. So thank you, Rachel. As you've mentioned, taking that whole strategy and put it into 45 minutes is an impossible task. So we appreciate that you've provided that template for us, and everybody can view that after the webinar with the recording. Thanks, Richard. I feel like you really added a lot of value onto Rachel's points, and brought your own experience to life with that and made it relatable. And Philip, thank you again for bringing the context in and facilitating that. I know it's not been easy. As I mentioned, so the question box on the right hand side, please feel free to bring the questions through. Myself and Philip will put them forward to the panel. And just while we'll wait for those questions to come through, don't forget the recording will be sent out. And you can achieve basis points this evening. If you want 2 basis points, pop your details in the questions box and I'll follow up with you to make sure you get those. Okay, so Philip, do you want to go first? We'll
Yeah.
get the questions out.
Okay, yeah, so another question for Richard. You touched on your military background, Richard. You obviously had to recruit people to you based on skills and attitude and a whole multitude of things, not least perhaps to die for you, which might be a bit extreme in a farming context today. But I just wonder whether there are tips that or situations that you employed in the military that you don't now and you wish you could, or you think you would make a better employee, or recruitment would be better for our industry if you could employ some of the strategies, techniques, tips that you employed in the military.
The one benefit about the military, certainly in my day, was we had a thing called military law. So within reason, what you said went, and people were. I mean, it was quite clever in the military, in fact, that they would obey and sometimes disobey. One hopes the rank and not the person. But that doesn't really cut it in Civvy Street and in many other businesses. I'm sure it would be very sad, but also I think extremely beneficial for both parties in Civvy Street. I mean, the one thing that perhaps made my life not easier, but it made, let's say, men under command understand one's job more. Whenever we were out on exercise, and it may have been for 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and I'll just put it in context. I was a armoured reconnaissance troop leader, so in my troop we had 4 armoured cars, although they look like small tanks, and 3 men in each one, so 12 men in a troop. And invariably, each vehicle commander would have far more experience in the job than I did. But one thing I really enjoyed doing, because I'm sure they all thought, oh, here's the bloody officer never pulling his weight, but you were using your skills in a different context. So I made it an absolute law that at least for one 24-hour period, I got one of my vehicle commanders to do my job. And that would mean, going all the way back, 30 kilometers at night, but back to squadron headquarters to take orders. And then he would have to come back after a very tiring day, disseminate orders and give them to the troop and then take them on the next day. And I can assure you that after every 24-hour period, not one of them wanted my job. So I think it's very good to be able to communicate to staff that, your job shouldn't necessarily be the same. It is different because you may have a wider set of issues and problems to think about, where their job might be micro decision making on the job in hand. The boss quite often has a myriad of things to think about, whether it's weather, cropping, cash flow, bank manager, something else. And I think that it's never healthy for a boss to, keep all those problems necessary to himself. I don't mean unburden yourself on your staff all the time because they'll get bored of that. But it's just the art of communication, bit of job sharing, to make the whole team understand that we all have different pressures within a job. They may not all be the same, they're invariably different, and they may all have different pressures on the business and on the individual. So, making people aware of what everyone else does in a business is always helpful.
Sounds a bit like in my world, giving the frying pan to the kids when they moan what supper you cook for them.
Okay, so we've got quite a few questions coming through, so we'll try and keep these snappy because we've still got a bit to get through. So, Rachel, what would be your top 3 points when developing a people strategy for the first time?
Right, top 3 points. So probably does reflect what I sort of mentioned in the beginning of what I think people strategy should be, but it's very subjective to the business. So first of all, I'd really review where you're at. Have you got the right people in your business? Just because they're perhaps not the right people, can they be the right people? So actually, can you develop them enough to become those right people in your business? And then I think thirdly, as a beginning is I'd review where you want to be as a business in the next 2 to 5 years. And actually, are those people with that development, are they the right people to take you where you want to be? Is that snappy enough?
Yeah, snappy. As we mentioned, there is the template which has a row of questions to get through, so that was great. I really like this one, which you'll see me and Philip. So, do you think branded work clothes motivate staff to portray a more professional appearance? And you'll be happy to know, I normally sit here in my pajamas, but you're lucky I've got a AHDB polo shirt on tonight. So, Rachel, we'll come to you first. What do you think? Branded work clothes, is it motivating the team?
I think it definitely makes you feel part of something. I think it probably depends on the brand. Shall we say it depends on the quality of clothing? That sounds a bit judgmental, but if I think that is thing. But I agree. I think it looks great, and I think what it does is, as long as you sort of back up that brand with how you behave and those brand values, people should be wearing your polo shirt or your gilet with pride. So yeah, and I think it's a great idea. Why not?
Everyone loves the uniform, and I think you're right. It gives one a sense of belonging and actually a sense of worth. I mean, we don't actually do it. I've been thinking about it for a long time, but you know, everyone sort of likes, I think, job titles, and they like to be part of something. So I think that as long as it's not made out of sort of fluorescent pink nylon, you know, perhaps it's a good thing to, because it just gives you a sense of belonging. And it's probably rather like, does it induce responsibility? I don't know. I mean, I've often wondered, you know, when you're driving along a road and you see a van driver and he's got the business name on the back, do they drive better? Do they not? I don't know. Philip, what do you think?
Yeah, it does depend on the person, but I think broadly, Richard, I agree. I think it does engender some sort of responsibility and some ownership. I think at the same time, you as a business owner, or the person behind it all, has got to back it up so that it's not hollow.
Yeah, sounds good. Just a couple more before we have to do the wrap up. So this is quite a good one actually. If we're talking about strategy, would you go to the level of discussing business finances, profit and loss with your employees so they really do understand every decision they make and the impact it has on the business?
If you want to, yes. I'm quite a fan, again, I know it sounds a bit business, of setting KPIs for key staff members and sharing information, especially information that perhaps will drive profitability. So, you know, yields, or sort of perhaps in terms of dairy, milk quality. So things that actually directly affect that bottom line. I think it's important. Whether you want to go and give them your full sort of account detail would be up to you. And it probably depends on the individuals and the business, but yeah, definitely. I think data and information empowers staff and helps them be part of that. And I think, as Richard mentioned, it takes them on the journey with you.
I think the benchmarking is a very useful thing, because actually, if you can involve staff, you don't have to do the whole picture on one's cost, because you might open yourself up a bit. But certainly, you know, competition is always healthy, and if you can reward and compliment your staff on saying, congratulations, you know, we are in the top 10% of performance with variable costs. I think that it makes them feel good. And I think you've also, you know, but you mustn't go too far and always paint a depressing picture, which sadly, you know, farming can be, can't it? Because we're always sort of slightly financially under pressure in pure arable farming, or maybe pure bee farming, or what have you. So I think it's quite good to give staff a good understanding of what the climate, the financial climate one has to operate in, and then extrapolate relevant data so that they can judge their own performance and the business performance with their peers.
Okay, so this will be the last question. I don't think you can answer it. It's probably one for our future strategy, to be honest. But before we hand over to Philip, so with more required from the operators, having to use more complex equipment and under greater pressure, where is the knowledge gap going to be filled from in the future? There are less unskilled jobs now than ever. So that might be a bit of an open one ready for our strategy for AHDB, but thanks for that question. Rachel, have you got any points to make on that?
Yeah, I suppose it goes back to attracting the right people and thinking, who are we competing against as an industry for those types of people? What jobs will they be going for? And I think it goes back then to thinking about the sort of jobs that we're offering, the expectations, and perhaps linking into, again, I don't want to bang on about the brand, but our brand values, how we sort of demonstrate ourselves as a professional industry to work in. So that's where I'd start thinking, is where are those people going now, or where will they be going if we don't attract them?
Amy, I'll just say that I think there's some really bright cookies in our schools and colleges today. There's no shortage of skills, and I would say it's just as exciting to come and drive a £500,000 combine or a fancy whizzy sprayer with all the technology. You sit in Richard's fence and look at the technology and that. Who needs to go and fly typhoons or something perhaps a bit more sexy? It's just as much fun and just as high tech on a farm.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I think we've got to, well, my one word of advice is if you buy a nice, big, new, sexy piece of machinery, make sure you get the free training with it. Because they really are, as we all know. But I would just stress, farming should be about people. And I have one worry in the future is that there's going to be more automation, there are going to be more robots. If we're going to sell ourselves as a brand and want our customers, frankly, to buy our produce, is it going to be easier because one has a happy, proactive workforce, and it's like the money cycle. We are employing local people. The money goes round and perhaps stays in our local area. Is that going to be easier to justify? Or is it going to be easier to have the really high-tech option of robots doing everything with no one employed in the countryside? I don't think I would want to work in that situation. I like to have people around because it keeps one sane. Might make one mad every so often, but generally, I think it keeps one sane. And I think that is one really big question we have to ask of technology as a whole. Is it doing society a good? Because actually people feel good about themselves if they feel productive and they feel that they have a worth within society or within a business. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Sounds like another topic for a webinar. Okay, so we're going to move on. Thank you once ever so much for that. So just a quick one on next steps. So our next webinar, we don't do one in December. The next one will be January, mental health and wellbeing. There's links here to look at our previous webinars, also the tools and templates that we've mentioned this evening. And just keep in touch because we have a lot of skills activity going on, and obviously the Manage Farm activity. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to thank Rachel and Richard once again, but I'm going to hand over to Philip, who's going to give an arable update.
Okay, thanks, Amy. Yeah, just a few quick slides from me. As I said at the beginning, this is part of the Monitor Farm Monday program, and here they're weekly webinars now on a whole range of subjects featuring our monitor farmers around the country. So it's all on the website, on the Monitor Farm Monday website there, for you to go and look at the topics and register to get the links to join our webinars. As well as, if you move on, Amy, as well as the webinars, there's some key weeks in our diary going ahead. The first of those starts next week today, featuring the results and what is going on from our strategic farms around the country. And there's a series of outputs of webinars and podcasts and so on, featuring Brian, Rob, and David there in the course of next week. Strategic farms, where we're linking research with on-farm, farm scale, rotation scale trials. And then going on, Amy, at the end of November, we would normally have our, in the flesh, so to speak, agronomy conference. Sadly, that's not going to happen. So to replace that, again, we built a program of agronomy-focused webinars and podcasts again for the cereals and potato sectors, which will be a range of presentations through the course of that week. as Amy mentioned, these slides are all going to be available afterwards, and there's links and addresses on the bottom there. Next slide, Amy. And if you can't find what you're looking for on the arable sector, as indeed all the sectors in AHDB, there's a whole team of us for each sector around the country. Easy to find on a website. So just give us all a ring or drop us an email, and we'll point you in the right direction for what you're looking for. So hopefully, very quickly, just to round off, that gives you an update of where we are on the cereals and oilseeds side. Thanks, Amy.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much, Philip. Thanks again to the panel. Luke, who's in the background doing all the technology, it's gone quite smoothly. Thank you. Just another reminder, if you are BASIS registered and you want to get your BASIS points, pop a note into the question box or contact us afterwards and we'll be able to allocate those points to you. The recording will be sent once we've got it all set up and ready to go, along with the template. So once again, thank you very much, Rachel. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Philip. And that's it from us. Good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.